Over the many years of film, one of the most popular genres of film is war. There is something entrancing about war movies and the way that they portray history. But without question, the Vietnam War was one of the most destructive and unnecessary wars that the US primarily fought in. Over 1 million southern and northern Vietnamese civilians were killed throughout the 10 years that America was involved. After the war was finished, Francis Ford Coppola released the production Apocalypse Now, and eventually became one of, if not the most important and influential war films ever made. About 40 years later, a movie with completely different subject matter called Kong Skull Island came out, and it stands as the best film in the current monsterverse of the four-movie series. Skull Island is set during the time period of the Vietnam War. These two movies set Vietnam as a time period rather than an actual plot of a film, but they portrayed the soldiers in two different ways. The reason that we won't look at movies such as Full Metal Jacket is that that they portray the soldiers in similar ways. So we want to look at the different experiences between the soldiers. Without further ado, let's get into the video. The first film that we are looking at today is Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. There are a lot of great war films, but one of the most important and influential films of all time is Apocalypse Now. The film is barely about the Vietnam War. The war is a backdrop to the story that is adapted from Heart of Darkness, a story about a group of military men led by Captain Willard to find Colonel Walter E. Kurtz, a deserter who has lost his way and gone crazy. However, I will leave the breakdown of Apocalypse Now for another video. I just want to talk about the war sequences in this film. As I mentioned, the war is a backdrop to the film, and there are two big battles throughout the film. They are still some of the greatest scenes ever made, and you have to go through the experience that Willard Clean, Chef, Surfer Boy, whoever, goes through. I want to go over what is, in my opinion, the best scene in the movie. So we have a soldier named Kilgore, and we see how Coppola blends music with storytelling. We know that Kilgore wants to make Vietnam similar to home for his soldiers, so he plays some classical music as they prepare an attack on a Viet Cong army station. They boom through the army station, have a hard-fought attack on it. It is perfect to see the genuine gore and bloodshed tuned to Ride of the Valkyries is enough for my jaw to drop while watching the helicopters fly. Seriously. Just flying these things is so cool for me. When they land, you see how the war affects its soldiers, especially by Kilgore making it more like home. You hear Willard say that Kilgore wants to make it more like home for his soldiers, but he makes it seem more far away. However, the real application of the war is through experience when we meet Colonel Walter E. Kurtz. Do you remember how cool it was to see Hannibal Lecter for the first time, and where he was slowly built up through previous dialogue? Well, that happens on a much larger scale. The movie keeps Kurtz away from us and tells us how insane he is, but when we get there, Kurtz is still just out of arm's reach, and everyone that Willard cares about is dead. And at some point, we see Kurtz as a person who is crazy. And at some point, we see Kurtz as a person who is so crazy, but he is instead soft-spoken and methodical. And you see that he has been changed by war. The experience has changed him. He was changed by the horror. Now, Kong Skull Island is nowhere near the sheer scale of Apocalypse Now, but there's one scene that is incredible. Now, Skull Island is about a giant monkey who kills people on an island, and a lot of the shit in the film is just fine by me, and the effects are really good, and there's some pretty cool world building. Vietnam is only a part of the film, and the movie takes place after the war has ended, but it is a similar situation as Apocalypse. Some of the characters long for the war, because it made them feel something similar to Willard. So when they enter Skull Island, it's insane. They play Paranoid by Black Sabbath, one of my favorite songs. I love this scene so much. The scientists are here for their little conspiracy theory, and the army is here as an escort to drop seismic bombs. And look at this crazy shot. This shot here encapsulates what I'm talking about. The bombs were made to recognize seismic charges under the surface of the Earth, but this guy is just having a great time watching this land explode. As we touched on in Apocalypse, not everyone wants to be here, but some definitely feel the love of war, especially destruction. It's within human nature to be greedy, and no human is truly pure, but for some who love war, it can be a coping mechanism with the real horror of what is out there. The scene with the seismic charges is made to show you the two sides of the conflict. The scientists who aim to study territory, and the army who enjoy destruction. This shot is extremely inhuman, and that's what the director wants to hammer home. Inhuman is exactly what people felt in the Vietnam War zone. Skull Island is a movie not about the Vietnam War, and it's not a movie talking about the dangers of the army. It's about monkeys and monsters. But the script keeps telling us about the war, and I can't explain why. The war against America is the anti-war perspective that this sequence takes. There is some confusion, rightfully so, that the man who is stranded here since World War II would be surprised and angry that there have been 2 wars since one of the most infamous and dangerous wars ever. Vietnam was a bloodbath on both sides, and ended up benefiting nobody but the USSR, which would disband in the 90s. In the end, the Vietnam War didn't cause anything good, except it was the reason that I was born. Kong Skull Island and Apocalypse Now pull together really interesting themes to portray how war works. There are surely better war films than Kong Skull Island. I don't even know if you can even call it a war movie. But together, the film is just... both films create a interesting perspective on war that you don't see in other war films that come out that aren't as good. Well guys, I guess that's it. I wanted to end this video by talking a little bit about Vietnam. Sam, cut the music. Vietnam was one of the most horrible events in independent American history. It is important that when you watch these films, remember that Vietnam was a real event in American history, and so many lives and dreams were ruined and shattered by the war. Kids as young as 18 could have been drafted into the war, and it was life or death out there. Those kids probably now have post-traumatic stress disorder, and some could be poisoned by the Agent Orange weapon, which could doom their children. Vietnam also caused the deaths of nearly 2 million civilian deaths on either side, and that is shocking. It's important to remember whenever you watch a war film that people's lives were genuinely affected, and a lot happened to them when the war happened. So, with that in mind, that is the end of my video, and I'll see you in the next one.